Hi guys and gals, and welcome to Magic. So this video is the continuation of the previous video where we created a simple HTTP web API endpoint wrapping our SQL, doing a select into the Chinook database, finding out which users were listening to what type of music genre. Let me just illustrate an invocation here. Just to recap what we did, here are jazz listeners. If I change it to rock, I get a rock listener. So if you didn't watch the previous video, I would encourage you to go back and watch that one. And also obviously follow these tutorials in sequential order because they're kind of like building on top of each other as one large tutorial where each video is a chapter. And also there's a link in the description of this YouTube video to a dev.to article where you should really actually start out. So anyways, with that out of our minds, let's play around with this particular endpoint. Now, the first obvious problem you have with a web API endpoint is to secure it. If I now copy this full invocation URL and I open up a browser incognito window, let me see if I can do that, new incognito window, and I paste in this URL, I'm getting data. Right now, that might not necessarily be, actually I'm not getting data because I didn't provide a query parameter. So let me provide a query parameter, genre equal rock. Now I'm getting data. That might be a problem because maybe we want to secure our web API such that only people whom we want to have access to this actually has access to that. So let's do that first. Let's just move this window up here, close this guy by clicking ask, and then go down here and type auth dot function control, whoops, function control space, and then do auth.ticket.verify. What this slot actually does, a slot is kind of like a function, is that it verifies that the user belongs to one or more roles, where the list of role is a comma separated list. If I now type root, for instance, comma admin, then the user invoking this particular endpoint needs to belong to either the role of root or the role of admin, or both, of course. Now, if I now save this file, if you remember from the previous video, that's Option S or Alt S on Windows, then that's enough. If I now do refresh here, ta-da, access denied. Now, why does this occur? Because I am not authenticated. When I'm invoking the endpoint from here, though, everything is still working. Why? Because the Magic frontend will automatically associate my JWT token with my invocation, implying that when I'm invoking it through Magic here, then I am authenticated as root. However, if I actually remove the root here, and I save the endpoint, function F5 to invoke it again, then I pass in rock. Now I need to belong to the admin role, and actually I don't belong to the admin role. So even though I'm root on the server, I still don't have access to this particular endpoint. So this allows you to easily secure your endpoint. Another problem we had, if I go back to here now, let's remove this guy by just commenting it out temporarily, at which point I'm getting data here, is that if I'm not passing in the genre query parameter here, then it's kind of working, except it's not like returning data. Why? Because genre here becomes null, and obviously there are no songs that belongs to null genres. So the way we can actually validate that the argument is actually explicitly given is by going to a new line, typing validators dot function control space or control space on window, and then we can do mandatory. Mandatory here means it has to be there. Then we type colon x colon at dot arguments slash asterisk slash genre. Save. If we now go back here and refresh, we will see mandatory argument genre not given. If we now pass in the argument genre equal jazz, everything is good. So this allows us to actually specify that an argument is mandatory. Now, there's a bunch of validators here. If you do function control space, you type validators dot, you will see all of them. Date, for instance, we have email validators that just validates that the argument actually is a valid email. Enum that validates that the arguments belongs to one or more, at least one predefined value. Integer, for instance, it takes a mean, colon 100, max, colon 200 at this point now. The argument that we're pointing to using some sort of expression, arguments, asterisk, int, or foo, must have a minimum value of 100 and a maximum value of 200. If we now add these arguments, foo, colon int here, we save the file, and we now go back here, and we add an argument, ampersand, foo, equal 201. You will see that 201 is not a valid number between 100 and 200 for the argument named foo. We change it, 200, everything is good. So these validators allows you to implement business logic to some extent easily on the server with one-liners, literally. So that's one thing we can do. Another thing we can do is that we can modify the response. If I now do response dot function control space, I will get all the slots that are relevant for the response. At this point, I can change the status of the endpoint. I can set status 201. If I now save it and I do F12 here and I do a refresh, you will see that the status that the endpoint returns, let me see, all here, is actually no longer 200, but 201. If I change it to 222, save it, I go back, I refresh, now it's 222, and so on. So 201 is typically for record was inserted, so that's like the correct semantic status code if you want to do like HTTP rests, which of course Magic supports for the record. So, but let's look at some of the other response slots here, particularly headers. Why? Because the header collection modifies how the browser perceives the HTTP request. This is actually very, very useful for a lot of things, particularly if we do now, I think it's cache control, colon, max age, private, comma, max age equal 200. I'm not entirely sure if this is the correct syntax, but let's try. If I save this file, I now go back here, I allow for cache to be used. I do control R once, it goes to the server, right? If I do control R once more, it actually, it's not supposed to go to the server. Let me see why. Cache. Now it took 216 milliseconds, as you can see. If I invoke it again, it takes 2 milliseconds. Why? Because the browser actually never invokes the server web API. It actually sees that the HTTP header that's being returned from here says, hey man, you can cache this for 200,000 seconds. As you can see here, if you close this guy and we refresh here now, then you will see if I look at this header collection, what the server is actually physically returning. You will see cache control, private max age equal 200,000 seconds. So it will actually take 200,000 seconds now before my browser says that, hey man, this invocation is invalid. We need to refetch it from the server. So if I invoke this billions of times, it never ever goes to the server before 200,000 seconds actually has passed. So this allows you to cache things on the browser in the front end or the client intelligently, having your HTTP client library automatically take care of invalidating the cache. And notice one particularly interesting thing. If I change this to 101, then all of a sudden now you see 2 milliseconds. Ta-da! Now it actually went to the server. Why? Because the default vary by HTTP header is actually query parameter. So if you change one of the query parameters, that invalidates the cache, and all of a sudden it needs to go to the server. If I invoke it again, the browser has still cached everything, so it's 2 milliseconds. If I change it to 102 and invoke it, then all of a sudden it takes 200 milliseconds once, and so on. So this allows you to modify the way your backend works intelligently. Yet again, there is a link to an article in the description of this YouTube video, to a dev.to article where you can actually copy and paste my code and have a look at it, and where I further explain the code. So anyway, that was it for this particular video tutorial. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day.